person like me comes along and writes a book on Druids and says, hey, it's, Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, Masonry, Templarism, Rosicrucianism, it's all based on ancient Druidism, and they laugh at you. Well, I can prove it. And one of the most important avenues to this proof is involving this particular vegetal type of symbolism.
What is the importance of trees in mythology? Is there a connection between ancient goddess worship and the Tree of Knowledge? How do sacred trees tie in with the Kabbalah? How do entheogens like mushrooms play into the ancient religions of Europe? How do you free the public mind from mass control? Tonight my guest is Michael Tsarion. Michael, welcome to Gnostic Media's podcast. How are you doing today?
Very well, Jan. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been a long time since I've been following your work and appreciate everything you're doing. So it's just great that have an educated host, so to speak. It's always fine to be on interviews of that nature as opposed to the other brand.
So why is ancient goddess worship important to tree worship?
Well, that's the big issue there, and of course, there's so many reasons for that. One of the most important was actually reasons strikes at the root of the Book of Genesis. As we know now from people like Lawrence Gardner and many others before him, and of course not to mention John Allegro and scholars of that type of academic level, obviously they've discovered that the Book of Genesis was a retelling of earlier stories, like the Gilgamesh and what have you, and all the Babylonian, the Garden of Eden and what have you. So it's basically accepted now that the Book of Genesis is a direct plagiarism of the old Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian stories. Ralph Ellis has pointed out beautifully in one of his latest books that there's an Egyptian tie-in there, that the very story of Garden of Eden pertains right to Akhenaten himself. So without getting into detail about that, all he's saying is that it does predate the dates of the Bible being written. And in those stories, especially the Babylonian and the Akkadian and Sumerian, which I think are identical to the Druidic, by the way, so in my reading of history, there's no difference between these groups. But in their reading of the Genesis story, a fascinating piece of information comes out, and it's written in the appendices there. And that is that in the Bible, God is the tree. God speaks through the tree, or at least in the old mythologies, God is identified with the tree. He speaks from the tree. The tree is his personal property. He's forbidding the primal parents from going anywhere near it. But in the original stories, what do you know? Eve is the tree. The female either is the tree or the female's consort. That means sexual partner, marriage partner, husband, if you will, is the tree. Because, again, the tree was always identified with God in ancient times before the Bible, destroyed the story or mutilated the story. Or she is the consort of the tree. The next question then is, who is Adam? Well, in the Bible, Adam is the firstborn of God. He's literally the God to be. He's going to be the being that's going to be before the sin, before the fall. He is literally God's chosen one, the one who's going to go into the world, and name the animals and own the creation. But in the original story, the Adam figure is born from the woman. In fact, the Adam character is the offspring of the female and the God.
Yeah, and in fact, if you read the Nag Hammadi text on the origins of the world, that is discussed there, and we republished that in Astrotheology and Shamanism, at least the part of that about Adam being born from Eve, or from Eve, and then Sophia comes down and banishes the 7 landlords out of Eden.
That's right. I do remember that part, and it pertains very much to this. And this is provable. This is directly provable because the original stories, and that also explains all the different iconography and these palm sets and these cuneiform tablets that they've discovered, is why the female is always seen in proximity to the tree. The fact of the matter is that the tree represented the unnameable figure of the higher intelligence. So even those who believe in a god, or that the ancients believed in a god, the symbol of their god was the tree, various trees. That's why Elohim means tree. It's the elm tree specifically. That's why Yahweh, Jehovah, represents a tree, specifically the yew tree. That's why Moses meets God at a burning bush. That's why all the symbolism, I even have symbolism of the Scottish Church. The Church of Scotland literally has a symbol. Their symbol is the burning tree, right? It actually looks like a mushroom, actually, and it's inside the vagina-shaped vesica. Because, again, these potentates and priests of the higher Masonic levels know exactly what we're talking about here that we're trying to reveal. And that is that the female was actually the original oracle. Students of even general mythology will know this.
Adonis was born from a tree, and so that would make sense, because if the goddess is the tree, that would explain how the god is born from the tree.
And simple common sense tells us that men are born from women, not the other way around. So this finally fits with even common sense biology all of a sudden. Hey, guess what? But this is in Akkadian, the Assyrians, and of course, we're forgetting to talk about the serpent, but even leaving the serpent aside, because again, the serpent played an important role in this.
You mean the caduceus, right?
Sure, yeah, exactly. Because remember, the tree of life always, not always, but often you can see a serpent on it. Egypt was referred to as the land of the tree and the serpent. In the Babylonian stela, you always see the symbol of the serpent. The serpent meant wisdom, of course, but the hieroglyphic for the female in Egyptian was a serpent, as it was in other cultures too. So the serpent was just another analogy or simulacra, not only for any female, though. This has to be borne in mind. It's what I refer to as the sacerdotal female, or the sacred priestly female. The one who is the initiator. She turns up in the Bible, of course, as Mary Magdalene, who literally anoints Jesus, which is an Egyptian ritual, and initiates him with the myrrh. The spikenard. You had mentioned that Adonis was born from a tree. His mother's name was Myrrh, from which we get the myrrh tree. And some scholars interpret it as myrtle, so it doesn't really matter. Myrtle and myrrh, the whole idea, connect. And this even goes back to Isis and Nephthys, all being connected to certain trees, especially the goddess Nuth, which I spent a lot of time writing about in the appendices, is connected to the tree. But it turns up as Mary Magdalene in the book of Genesis, and my reading of that is this, not in the book of Genesis, but in the New Testament. My reading of that anointing is not only that it was an Egyptian ritual in order to sanctify Christ, to make him into the Messiah, the true meaning of that word, but when you anointed a man with an oil that was abstracted from a plant, in this case spikenard, what you were doing was turning that man into the spikenard. It's really that simple, and it's so beautiful if you actually think about it. Other people think the anointing's incidental and it's what it means or is going to mean, etc. No, the very anointing of a human being with an oil of a certain plant was to identify that man with that plant. And then this goes even further when you find out that the name spikenard, the plant, actually comes from the genus nard, N-A-R-D. Spikenard comes from the genus nard, and that is the origin of the word nautrex, which is the opening portico of a church. When you first walk inside a church, they have a certain lobby, if you want to call it that.
Right.
That's called a narthex. And that's where the holy books and even the holy water is kept before you actually enter into the precinct, where the nave is and all the rest of it. Well, that is actually named after the spikenard plant and the genus nard. Right down, as I said, to the costumes, right down to the shape of the chalice, which of course you've gone into extensively in your work, how that connects to the sacred mushroom. And in my work, I also believe that we've just been talking about the tree of life. The tree of life also includes the mushroom. Not only is the tree, as we know it, connected to the female or identical to the female, the mushroom itself was the original burning bush. There's many mushrooms that even have an orangey, very bright, almost like a torch. So bright.
Yeah, the Amanita muscaria ranges from yellow to bright scarlet red.
That's right.
Yes, and of course these mushrooms grow in symbiotic relationship with specific types of trees, and especially the trees that are found sacred in ancient mythologies, such as the pine, the birch, the fir, the oak, and there's a few others. And in fact, I've even found Amanita muscaria growing at the base of an apple tree with Amanita on the ground next to fallen red apples.